So I want to start with the question, how engaged are your students really? How do we know that they're taking the content that we're giving in and they're understanding it and they're applying it to the real world? Now I want you to think about one student that's sitting in your classroom, not your top student, not the one who's most engaged, not your easiest student or the one who has all the answers, but I want you to think about your most disengaged student. I want you to think about the one who is quietly checked out, who avoids eye contact, maybe is coming into class late. The one who has learned how to play school, they're maybe the ones that are able just to pass through to get the good grade, but they're not really inquiring anymore. They're not using their imagination, or they don't really have that spark that's left in them. So I want you to think about, what do you think goes first? Is it their effort? Is it their thinking? Is it their engagement? What has stopped them from being that curious learner that they would have been maybe as a, younger, in the younger grade levels? I think it's their care. I think that a moment a student stops caring, everything else starts to fade. Their effort becomes minimal, their thinking becomes shallow, and their participation becomes compliance. And curiosity has completely left them. Curiosity is no longer there. Curiosity is also the hardest to rebuild. And so where does curiosity, what stems from curiosity? How do we become more curious? We have to have imagination. If we don't have imagination within ourselves to think beyond the obvious or think beyond the questions that are on the paper, everything else is going to be going. All right, so the real question is this: how do we design learning so students care enough to think deeply? Now I want you to imagine two classrooms. We have the same standard, the same content, the same objectives. In one classroom, students are completing a worksheet, and the other students are connecting to a real world problem. Now I want you to think about what changes. It's their engagement, it's their ownership, it's their persistence, and it's their depth of thinking. And what is encompassed in all of these? That keyword, imagination. In one classroom, students are looking for the right answer. In the other, students are asking questions. What if we tried this? What if I looked at it in a different way? How could I take this problem and adapt it to something in the real world? They're asking those questions that are causing them to be more engaged and eventually leading to that curiosity. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what PBL is. So PBL is a student-centered approach. Students are becoming the active learners in the classroom. We're not standing up in the classroom presenting all the information, but rather we're asking them a question and we're asking them to come up with the answers. PBL must have students learning through real-world challenges. And so we need something that is connected outside the classroom. It can't just be something with the content of what we're teaching inside the classroom. We want to be able to connect to something, to a different possibility, in answer to something that might not already exist just from us as a facilitator. When we design PBL, there are three strong anchors or indicators. We must have authenticity, we must have student ownership, and we must trust the process with the product. Authenticity is what is going to connect learning to the real world. It's also going to invite students to imagine, which again is something that I believe is what goes away when we have that passive learner. Also, we have that process over product. So yes, we want students to have a final product that they're giving out or a final answer, but it's the process where the learning really takes place and the learning really happens for them. And then again, I think all of that kind of goes back into that imagination piece. Imagination lives in the process, just in the final result. What PBL is not. A lot of times people think project, it's something that comes at the end of a unit or the end of a lesson, but that's not what it is at all. It's not just a fun activity that they just complete in groups. It's not just extra work, and it's not isolated from instruction, but rather PBL becomes the instruction. I am in K-12. I teach 10th grade to English. And so for them, this is probably the most frustrating part because I'm asking them to come up with the answers. I'm not the giver of information. They're giving me the information back. And this is a lot of times where kids get really frustrated with me, but we're always pushing through that. And once they get to the end product, they're definitely understanding why I pushed them the way I did. All right, why PBL matters. So I did my dissertation on project-based learning and the impact that it has on student engagement and motivation in the classroom. So if you read any research on PBL, hyperbole here, but almost all say that it's going to increase engagement in the classroom. I've read studies from all over the world, India, China, United States, and that's just the culminating thing is that project-based learning is going to help students become more motivated. So it increases engagement. Make sure I'm touching on everything here. When students understand why something matters and how it connects outside the classroom and into the real world, they become more invested in the learning process, especially for me teaching high school sophomores. They're not always interested in learning about ELA, right? They want to know, how can I connect this to what I'm doing outside the classroom? PBL also gives students the opportunity to imagine, to create, and to think critically. So this quote from Frontiers in Education, student-centered learning promotes active participation, critical thinking, and increased engagement in the learning process. And again, this is that frustrating piece for students. Just give me the answer. Just tell me how to get that A. No, you need to become the curators and you need to become the researchers to think more deeply. PBL also promotes deeper learning. So again, we're going beyond that memorization, beyond applying, just questioning, and we're asking kids to analyze content and create new content. Through PBL, critical thinking becomes part of their everyday learning process rather than just one specific assignment. And then finally, as students investigate those real-world problems and work to create meaningful solutions, they're developing a deeper understanding of concepts and relevance, again, beyond that classroom. This is often where we see that curiosity, that motivation, that spark kind of come back into their eyes again. And then this is obviously something that if we're in a traditional classroom, we're not always going to see, because in a traditional classroom, the educator is the keeper of the knowledge and the students are the ones that are supposed to be soaking it in. In a PBL classroom, the students become basically the teachers in that regard. All right, so research highlights many different areas on PBL, but I picked out a few. Again, relevance increases student motivation. Students learn more when content connects to real life. We know that when we can connect it to something outside the classroom, maybe their personal interests or their future goals, that they're going to have more care. And then with more care is where engagement naturally follows. Research also tells us that when students are given autonomy and ownership in their learning, that engagement significantly increases as well. When students have opportunity to make their own choices, they're more likely to feel ownership in that. So we want them to share ideas, collaborate with others. They become responsible for their work. We're hoping that they become more invested in the learning process with that. And then instead of just simply completing a task to get a grade, they're working through a project and it's more of like a long-term goal. We also know that appropriate challenges matter. So we want students to be critically thinking. We want students to have that higher participation in the learning process rather than us just giving it to them. And then again, I believe that all of these things, autonomy, student-centered learning, relevance, that we're going to get that imagination back in them. And I'll show you a couple ways in a little bit of what kind of that looks like. All right, in order for PBL to be effective, there are 5 key elements that I've pulled out either from my research or what I've done in my classroom. One of them is you have to have an authentic problem. It needs to be real, it needs to be meaningful, and students need to feel like they can explore it and that it's worth exploring. Student voice and choice. This is where students' ownership increases because I'm giving them the opportunity. Tell me how you want to learn. Tell me what you want to learn. Tell me how can we change this topic? How can we look into problems that it might have or might create for other people? And what do you want to take out of it? Inquiry and research, that frustrating part for students. They have to ask questions. They have to investigate. Can't tell you how many times students say to me, just give me the answer. Just tell me what project to do. Just tell me how I should go about this. No, you need to decide that. I'm giving you the ownership back. Collaboration. In order for PBL to be effective, students have to collaborate. This is also a frustrating thing because if you do have that high flyer, right, they want to do it all on their own. And if you have that person that kind of sits back and doesn't do anything, they're just going to try to do that. But you can set it up in such a way that everybody has to contribute to the whole. And then we have to have a public product. So we have to be able to share beyond the classroom. It's not just something that they present to you, but maybe they present it like something like this at a student conference or a community exhibit or to community leaders, politicians, someone at the university, back at home to their school boards. It has to be something that's presented back to the public. So how does this lead to intrinsic motivation? How are students going to be intrinsically motivated to want to complete this project? So intrinsic motivation is the internal drive that pushes students to engage, persist, and care about their learning without relying solely on just that external reward or a grade. This is something that's hard to do, but it is possible with PBL. So here are the 3 instructional elements that I've pulled out for PBL. And what happens because of it. So the first one is choice, giving students the choice to design their project in what way they want to present the information how they want to ask their own questions rather than just the questions we're giving them. What happens with that is students take ownership of their learning. They're more likely to feel as though they have their own sense of ownership and feel a sense of control and purpose, and again, that investment in their learning. Relevance, it has to be relevant to their real lives. Again, I'm working with high school sophomores, so they're interested in sports. They're interested in theater or drama, maybe gaming. I'm thinking some of the boys more so. How am I going to make what I'm teaching to them relevant, especially when I'm teaching something like American Lit, when we're talking about Plymouth Plantation? How are they going to make that relevant to their real worlds? And when it becomes relevant, students find that purpose. They're able to connect their learning to real life and help them to see value and put meaning back into their work. And finally, challenge. Students, again, get frustrated with me, but at the end, when they see how they persisted, when I've given them tasks that are appropriately difficult to their learning, this builds their resilience and encourages students to keep trying in a way that is going to be more challenging for them in the future. Okay, so I'm going to share a sample project that I've done in my classroom before. And this is more, like I said, maybe tailored towards K-12, but I want you to start thinking about ways that you could adapt this in your classrooms or wherever you're at in your journey kind of as educators or leaders here. So the question I ask students, especially when we're talking about American Lit, is whose stories get told, right? We have like primary source documents, we have historical accounts, so we're hearing different perspectives from different parts of history in American literature. So whose story is getting told, and we're looking more at local history because I want students to be able, again, to find that relevance to their real world. So rewriting local history through different perspectives. Some of the questions I'm asking them: whose voices are included in history and what stories do they tell? Whose voices are missing or overlooked? How does perspective change the way we understand history? So I have students look at primary source documents with, let's say, of Plymouth Plantation, what was happening with the Pilgrims and what was happening with the Native Americans. We often only get the Pilgrims' perspective. And so what perspective is missing and where can we kind of fill in some of those gaps? Okay, so I'm going to show you a little bit more about this project, and I can also show you then the how and what behind PBL, how that can work in your own classrooms. All right, for this project, students act as historians. They're investigative journalists, they're archivists, and they're storytellers. I'm asking them to explore how history is shaped by perspectives, biases, access to power, and then that missed or maybe those silenced voices. I'm also asking students to think more deeply about history, about the stories they've encountered. I typically do this project after we've done American literature, usually from the beginning. So we start with the Native American creation stories and we go to about the 1800s. So they've been hearing different excerpts of writing. I mean, I'm in teaching high school, so we're reading little sections of things. But I'd say this is about 6 weeks into the unit, maybe 5. And then I'm asking them to kind of do this project after they've heard multiple perspectives. Oh, and then I'm also asking them to tell me why does it matter? Why does it matter that we're missing some of these voices? Why do we care? Why do we care today when we're reading something from the 1600s? Why should, how are we going to connect those two things from the 1600s to their real world today? All right. Their final project, I've had students do this in a couple different ways, but we want students, again, to be creating. We want them to show what they've done in the classroom to someone outside. So that could be a museum-style display, a digital or physical, narrative essays or multimedia stories, maybe something published in a newspaper, a podcast episode or short documentary, or just a curated collection of primary sources. But I'm asking them to show it to someone else, not just me in the classroom. All right, if we look inside the project, there's, I believe, 5 or 6 phases that I've kind of set it up as. So for the first phase, we're asking students to research. I want them to look at key events. Find an event that's interesting to you. Maybe it's something that happened in Fargo, maybe like the Fargo tornado, I don't know. Something that's going to be relevant to them. Maybe it's something that an event, because I teach in Kindred, something that happened in Kindred. But I want them to find key events and to look into local and regional history. We're going to be looking at existing textbook narratives that I've presented to them. They're also going to be looking at official historical accounts. From there, when they've collected that, they're going to analyze. I'm having them read letters, diaries, photos, listening to oral histories, newspaper archives, interviews with community members. Maybe they go home and talk to their grandpa or their uncle, but they're looking outside just what I'm giving them in the classroom. From there, I'm asking students to look into multiple perspectives. So I'm asking them to reframe one historical event from a different perspective. So we might have Indigenous perspectives, immigrants, the labor or workforce. What are political leaders saying about that event? What are everyday citizens hearing or understanding? But I'm asking them to kind of compare what they've read to something, maybe a framework of someone that hasn't been able to share their story. From there, students are building their exhibit. They're creating their podcasts, they're writing their newspaper articles, they're creating their posters that they're going to share at the exhibit. But I'm asking them to write their narratives. I'm asking them to integrate evidence. So show me what you learned, show me the research. Where does this come from? And then again, students are making that choice. I'm giving them the voice and choice of how they're presenting the information and maybe even who they want to present it to. Can't have PBL without peer revision and feedback. So maybe having students share projects with each other. Maybe a gallery walk around the room. Maybe, we're doing digital world, they can share their PowerPoint of their project with each other digitally. But students have to give feedback to one another. Groups have to be able to share different ideas. Me as the teacher, I'm also giving them clarity on things. This doesn't quite make sense, or maybe it's not deeply connected. How can I connect it somewhere else? The accuracy of evidence. Do you have all your research in there? Are you citing your sources? And then the strength of perception or perspective representation. Are we representing actually what you want to represent, or are you still only telling that one type of story? Finally, the big public piece. We're sharing our information. We're sharing it with community members. Maybe it's just to other teachers in the building. Maybe we're taking it to a city council meeting, but we're sharing what we have learned and we're showing that information out to the public. We're not just keeping it for ourselves. And then in that, students become curators of history themselves. And so that's that ownership piece, is that I made a difference, or I was able to share my findings with someone else. And maybe then they're going to take that information and share it with someone else. Okay, so what collaboration looks like. This is probably one of the most difficult pieces, especially when you have that highly engaged student and that one that's not so engaged. But students are all responsible for a role in the group. For high school, I make sure it's very specific. This person's doing this person's doing this, and so on and so forth. For higher education, maybe they come up with those rules or those goals themselves. But each role needs to be tied to a shared goal, tied to that driving question. So how are perspectives shaped in history, for my example. And then we want to make sure that we have groups that are supporting and challenging each other's thinking, because that's where that curiosity is sparked and where that imagination comes from or takes place. So what this action looks like, We can divide tasks based on strength and purpose. Have students set up meeting times to meet regularly. For the high school classroom, I'm giving them meeting times. On this day, you have to come with this information. You're going to share it with each other. You might share with other group members, like in different groups. I'm asking them to use those discussions to refine ideas, not just dividing up the work, but making sure that everybody is, kind of doing their fair share. And then I tell students too, and this is big in high school, you're getting a grade just like everybody else is getting a grade. Everybody has to do something in order for all this to work. So the success is not just, no, I'm not giving you an individual grade, but you have to make sure that everybody is contributing to the work to make sure that it's going to be an effective project. And I have done it differently in the past too, where I've done a grade specifically for the group and then a grade specifically for the student as well, so that, and maybe like averaging them out so that the kids aren't feeling like, well, I don't want to be solely just graded on my individual or solely just graded on the group. For this project, here are some of the roles that I've kind of set out. So we have the researcher, the main researcher. This person finds and verifies information, gathers evidence. The facilitator, this person maybe leads the discussions. Is going to keep the group focused and moving. Maybe they're the ones that have to set up like a calendar for the project to make sure everything gets done on time. The recorder, a lot of times this becomes the student that's interested in like multimedia. They're documenting ideas, notes, and group decisions. We have the designer and the creator. This person is building the final product. Again, this might be like a multimedia person if you're doing like a podcast, but they're building the final product, in the visual elements. The presenter, this person is sharing the group's learning just with the class. If I'm doing this outside the classroom, everybody has to contribute, but for the presenter, that person would be responsible kind of for gathering information to teach to the class. And then that quality checker, are you citing your sources, reviewing the work, checking for clarity, making sure those voices are told. Okay, we do have a little bit of time, so I would like to have just a little bit of discussion. So I kind of, like I said, tailored this more towards K-12, but I want you to think about a standard or a topic that you're teaching. How can you turn that project or that question into a real world, open-ended driving question, something that invites inquiry, discussion, and problem solving. So I'll give maybe just a couple minutes to talk at your tables, maybe start thinking of some ideas and then sharing. So some sentence starters you can use. How might we, what is the impact of this? In what ways can we, how can we solve? So just for the interest of time, if anybody feels comfortable sharing, what are some driving questions that you've created or might be able to create or think about ideas maybe you were able to think about?
Yeah, things. I don't know them personally, so it could be challenging. But I mean, I think that's how the students looks like. It's incredible, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's the tricky part because you have to coordinate schedules and dates and events. Like, where do you find an event space? Is it going to be free? Yeah, that's definitely a big piece. That's why a lot of years I switch it up how we do it. Sometimes it might just be to the teachers, or we have like a common period where kids just come around and look. But I have done more of like a community exhibit with like an art show type thing able to do. So yeah, that's definitely one challenge to PBL for sure. Anybody else I would like to share? Okay, well, hopefully you have some ideas. I heard a lot of good conversations just in that little quick bit of this is what I'm struggling with, or maybe I could change this, or how could I do this differently? So yeah, we just want to start thinking about some of those ways that we can use this. All right, so additional examples, I tailored more towards ELA, but community projects, how can we improve our school, our community? How can we improve college or this part of the college or whatever it might be? Like right now, our school, we need a new playground at the elementary school, and how are we going to find funds for that? So I've had students talking ideas kind of surrounding that. Real world product or project, how can we create a business product? Something that people can use. Students design something, a snack, an app idea, a small business. Maybe it's a coffee cart. Maybe it's selling a different type of bubbler. That's popular right now. So yeah, kind of doing an idea like that, and then maybe they like make a Shark Tank type idea. And then inquiry-based investigations. What's the best way to reduce waste? Students are asking questions, running experiments, looking at research and presenting evidence. So let's review. PBL, it has to be real world relevance, otherwise you do not have PBL. You need to make sure it requires critical thinking. It's not just a yes or no question. Students are going to be frustrated with you. Give me the answer. Tell me how I get the A. Not doing that today. You have to figure that out. Student voice and choice. How are they presenting the information? In what ways do they want to kind of bring their information together and to culminate into that final project or that product? You have to have built-in revisions. Students are going to fumble, they're going to fall, they're going to need your guidance in helping them. You're going to have collaboration issues. So-and-so is not doing their work. So-and-so hasn't started yet. You have to kind of be the facilitator of that and help them. And then, of course, for me, I have to align with my standards, and we all do as well. We have to make sure it's relevant to the content and the area of teaching. I'm sure you're thinking, how am I going to do this? There's so many comments, there's so many challenges. I've probably hit them all in my time, but one of them is time. How do I have time to do this? I'm teaching a 6-week course or a 12-week course. How am I going to make sure that we get this done in time? For me, it's planning intentional checkpoints, making sure that the project's moving forward, letting students know this is going to be due on this date. This is when the final project is happening. This is when the presentation is happening. We need to make sure we're giving them clear rubrics. How are they going to be graded? That's a question I get all the time. Well, if I just get a group grade and my group doesn't do the work, that's not fair to me. So that's why I've been able to do sometimes that individual rubric versus that group project rubric. So then maybe average those scores out to kind of put them at a safe space where they're being evaluated effectively. And then readiness and scaffolding, providing supports. Like I said, at this point, when I'm doing this project, they've already been reading for 5-6 weeks. They've been reading a lot of American literature. So they know a lot of the history, but just providing models, templates, mini lessons throughout. This isn't just a time where you're throwing them to the wind and say, go work on your project, right? We want them in our classrooms. We want them working on it with us. We want to see them kind of doing that inquiry in the classroom as well. And then again, hopefully, if we have some of these things in place, we're making sure that students are respectful learners in this. Okay, so we kind of did that already. We'll just action steps. You need start small. You don't need to change everything at once. It can be just a mini project that you do. Maybe you don't do that public piece right away, but you just keep it inside your classrooms. Collaborate with your colleagues, right? Sometimes someone else is the best curator of helping us kind of spark our own imagination in that. Plan and share your ideas, and then reflect and revise. I never teach the same PBL twice. I'm always changing things up. Last time it was the rubrics that really messed kids up, so I'm changing that for next year. So reflect and revise and change things. Change things for yourself. All right. I want you to reimagine learning. It all starts with you. When students stop working for the grade and they start working for something that matters, everything changes. Their engagement, their thinking, their ownership in the project. I kind of want to leave you with this. Think of one unit, one area that you could change. It doesn't have to be this big change. It can be something small, and you can build up to that. And make sure that it's a problem worth solving, because when students understand that it's something that's going to be relevant for them outside the classroom, their learning is going to change, their engagement improves, their thinking deepens, and students begin to see themselves as capable learners, not just in our classroom, but outside in the real world. And that's the goal, right? We want to make sure that we're helping to kind of fuel that curiosity and driving engagement, thinking, and ownership in their work. Thank you.